Tommy Tuberville blocked hundreds of military promotions, holding America's defense hostage. One letter, one voice from Vietnam. Jasmine Crockett raised it high, and in seconds he went from defiant to defeated. His smirk collapsed, his defense crumbled, and the chamber became a courtroom of reckoning. So what secret inside that letter struck the blow he could never recover from? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The U.S. Capitol hearing room was packed to the walls, cameras flashing, every network broadcasting live to millions. No empty seats, no casual chatter, just the electric tension of a nation waiting. This was no ordinary hearing. It was branded by the press as the showdown that would decide the honor of America's military. Every breath felt like it might ignite the room. Senator Tommy Tuberville sat like a king on his throne, arms crossed, chin high, a smirk fixed to his face. To him, this wasn't a hearing. It was a political football game. He thought he held the playbook, using block promotions as pawns, flexing his power as if soldiers' futures were trophies to collect. Opposite him, Jasmine Crockett sat, steady eyes, sharp voice, unspoken but lethal. A lawyer by training, a fighter by blood, her father's Vietnam letter burned inside her folder. She was here to draw a line. Would arrogance or sacrifice define America's conscience tonight? The air inside the Capitol hearing room was suffocating, every camera locked and every lens catching the tension that trembled through the floor. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, her voice cutting clean through the silence like a blade. Senator Tuberville, can you explain to the American people why you are blocking hundreds of military promotions and why you are holding their careers hostage? The words didn't just land, they detonated, leaving the chamber teetering between outrage and anticipation. All eyes snapped to Tuberville, waiting for his counterstrike. He didn't hesitate. His palm slammed against the desk with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. The chamber jumped. The Pentagon is politicizing the military, he barked, his voice jagged, almost feral. He jabbed his finger toward Crockett, his face contorted with fury, veins tightening at his neck. This wasn't calm debate. This was a man cornered, thrashing, trying to turn his anger into dominance. His outburst wasn't aimed only at Crockett. It was aimed at the millions of Americans watching, as if sheer volume could disguise fragility. Then he leaned in, his tone sharpened into a dagger. You've never worn the uniform, he hissed, eyes narrowing into slits. You don't understand sacrifice. The words dripped with contempt, not just dismissing her question, but erasing her worth, her authority, her right to even speak. It wasn't political sparring, it was personal humiliation, a strike meant to brand her as unworthy before the nation. And then, like fuel poured on fire, came the laugh, a booming, mocking laugh that rolled across the chamber like thunder. It wasn't humor. It was scorn, arrogance, so thick it rattled the air. He tilted back, savoring his own performance, while a cluster of Republican allies snickered along, their laughter stacking on top of his like a wall of derision. It was a spectacle of power meant to crush and belittle. But the room didn't unite in amusement. The other half froze, their silence louder than any shout. Veterans in the gallery stiffened, their faces carved in disbelief. Staffers exchanged looks of shock, their fingers paused above keyboards. The chamber split clean down the middle, one side cackling, the other choking on fury. And in the heart of it, Jasmine Crockett did not move. No tremor, no retreat, just stillness. Her silence was deadly, her eyes locked on Tuberville, like twin blades drawn from their sheath. The mocking laughter still echoed, but it was already fading, drowned by the sense that something far more devastating was about to strike. The echo of Tuberville's mocking laugh had not yet died when Jasmine Crockett leaned in, her eyes burning like sharpened steel. Her voice sliced through the noise, low but lethal. You were a football coach, Senator. Coaching is not the battlefield. A loss on the field never means a man comes home in a coffin. The words landed like detonations, each syllable a blade carving into the hollow bravado he wore like armor. The chamber stilled, the air heavy, as if everyone was waiting to see whether Tuberville would bleed. Then she pivoted, her tone darkening, her voice carrying the weight of thousands who could not sit in that room. Right now, thousands of military families are suffering because of your blockade. Promotions delayed mean futures shattered. Officers who earn their stripes are trapped in limbo, Their careers stalled, their sacrifices mocked. Children go to bed not knowing what city they'll wake up in next month. Spouses can't take jobs because they don't know where they'll live. Families are drowning in uncertainty because you've chained them to your political agenda. Her words struck like artillery fire, relentless and devastating. You could almost feel the tremor ripple through the veterans in the gallery as her voice carried their pain into the record. Tuberville's face hardened, his jaw grinding, his knuckles pale against the mahogany desk. The calm swagger was gone, replaced by raw, boiling rage. Suddenly, he snapped his hand, came crashing down onto the desk again. The impact, thunderous, so violent the microphone screeched with static. Papers jumped, water glasses rattled, and the chamber flinched as though a bomb had gone off inside. His eyes blazed red, and his voice erupted. "Don't lecture me about the military," he roared, the sound tearing through the chamber like a whip. He lunged forward, his fingers stabbing at the air toward her. "I have stood shoulder to shoulder with real warriors, while you've been nothing but a politician desperate for TV time." The words weren't just shouted, they were hurled like weapons meant to break her in front of the nation. The clash spiraled into open warfare. Crockett's voice came back sharp as glass, cutting through his fury with unshakable precision. Tuberville shouted louder, the veins in his neck swelling, his voice cracking under the strain of his rage. The microphones quaked, their stands trembling under the violence of his fists in the fury of her rebuttals. The chairman slammed his gavel again and again, his own voice drowned in the maelstrom. Order, order in this chamber. But no one heard him. This was no longer a hearing, it was combat, and both refused to retreat. Across America, millions leaned closer to their screens, breathless. Veterans clenched fists, families sat frozen, commentators whispered that the Capitol itself had not heard fury like this in decades. It was no longer policy, it was survival, honor, and humiliation colliding in real time. Tuberville's roar thundered, Jasmine's blade-like words pierced, and the nation sat captive knowing something explosive was about to break. The clash had reached a fever pitch, and then Jasmine Crockett did something no one expected. She reached into her folder, her hands steady, her eyes locked on Tuberville. With deliberate calm, she pulled out a sealed envelope, the kind that already carried weight just by existing. The room went silent instantly, the chaos sucked out as if the air itself recognized something monumental was about to unfold. Cameras zoomed in every lens, catching the moment her fingers tore the flap. "This morning," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the silence, "I received a letter from someone who knows the true meaning of service. My father, Master Sergeant James Crockett, United States Air Force, retired. 22 years in uniform, 3 tours in Vietnam, a Bronze Star. A man who came home with scars and buried brothers in arms. A man who raised me with the lessons of sacrifice you will never comprehend." Her words carried a weight that made even the gavel rest. She unfolded the letter slowly, the paper trembling, not from her hand, but from the electricity of the moment. Then she began to read, her tone steady, almost ceremonial. "Senator Tuberville, I am Master Sergeant James Crockett. I served 22 years for this nation through mud, blood, and fire. I carried the bodies of men I called brothers. I dug graves in soil that still stains my dreams. I wrote letters to mothers telling them their sons would never come home. That is the cost of service. That is the weight of duty." The chamber was frozen, the only sound the echo of his words filling the air. Her voice dropped lower, every syllable like a hammer. "You have never known that cost. You have never held a dying man in your arms or written to a widow explaining why her husband will not return. You have never stood in silence over a flag-draped coffin. You, Senator, only know the cheer of a crowd in a stadium. You only know the roar of fans, not the silence of sacrifice." A ripple of shock ran through the gallery. Veterans in attendance bowed their heads, their eyes glistening. The letter grew sharper, unforgiving. "When you block promotions, you do not make a political point, you break lives. You stall careers that were earned with sweat and blood. You shatter families that already live with uncertainty. You turn service into punishment and sacrifice into collateral. And you do it with a smirk, as if duty is a game to play. It is not. It is sacred." Jasmine's voice didn't waver, even as the words scorched the chamber. Then came the line that cut deepest. "My daughter has more understanding of sacrifice in her little finger than you have gathered in your entire political career. She lived it. She moved from base to base, watched her mother wait by the phone, and wondered every night if her father would come home. She knows sacrifice because she was raised in it. You cannot laugh that away. You cannot erase that truth. And when she spoke those words, the entire room seemed to stop breathing. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that presses down on the chest and makes the heart pound louder. The cameras swung instantly to Tuberville. His face was red, his jaw tight, his teeth clenched as if grinding through humiliation. His lips pressed together, then parted as though to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes flickered with panic, his chest heaving as he fought to control himself. He bit down on his lip hard enough to show the strain and shifted in his chair like a man cornered. Then he half rose, his body jerking forward as if he would explode into rebuttal. But the timing betrayed him. The sight of him, flush caged, trembling under the weight of a veteran's truth, was already burned into the cameras, beamed into living rooms across America. And before he could spit out a single word, Jasmine folded the letter back into its envelope, her silence louder than any gavel. The silence after the letter was crushing, and Tuberville felt it pressing on him like a weight he could not shake. His face twisted, his composure shattered, and then he exploded. His voice tore through the chamber like a storm. "You're using your family's pain as a cheap stunt," he shouted, the words spitting from his mouth like venom. The force of his rage wasn't reason, it was desperation. The chamber jolted, gasps rising from the gallery, the tension snapping into chaos. He slammed his hand against the desk again, his voice climbing higher, shaking with fury. "I don't disrespect the military. I've had thousands of players who went on to serve this country." He barked, his chest heaving, his face red as fire. His words rattled with anger, trying to claw back control, but each syllable felt unsteady, unconvincing. His defense was not measured, it was frantic, wild, and deafening. The sound echoed not like strength, but like collapse. Then he lurched to his feet, the chair screeching across the floor, his whole body trembling with rage. He thrust his arm forward, fingers stabbing through the air at Crockett like a spear. "You're just using your father to score political points," he howled, his voice raw, cracking under the strain. The sight of a U.S. senator pointing, yelling, losing every trace of composure under the lights was shocking. It wasn't just anger, it was humiliation televised in real time. The chamber descended into uproar. Lawmakers shouted over one another, their voices colliding with the echo of his scream. "Order! Order!" The chairman pounded his gavel, striking the desk again and again, the sound drowned in the frenzy. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in tighter, the nation watching the spectacle unfold second by second. It was pandemonium inside the most powerful room in America. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She remained seated, her shoulders squared, her face calm as stone. While Tuberville unraveled, she waited, her silence sharper than any retort, her eyes steady, cutting through the storm. The contrast was unmistakable. One voice screaming itself hoarse, the other, a steel blade waiting for its moment. And across the country, millions could see the truth, a senator undone by his own fury, collapsing live before the nation's eyes. Tuberville's roar still echoed in the chamber, his finger stabbing the air, his voice raw with fury. But before the chaos could spiral further, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward with a calmness so sharp it cut through his rage like glass. She reached into her folder once more, this time pulling out a thick file wrapped in a red striped cover. Across the top, stamped in heavy black letters, were the words, "Declassified. Partial release." The room fell silent. Staffers stopped typing, cameras zoomed in, and even the chairman lowered his gavel mid-air. The very sight of the file shifted the hearing from a shouting match into something darker, more dangerous. Jasmine laid the file on the desk with a deliberate thud, the sound reverberating through the chamber. Her voice rang clear, steady, and lethal. "Senator, this is not emotion. This is not rhetoric. This is evidence." She slid the first page out, the Pentagon seal gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "These are official records declassified only days ago, documenting the national security consequences of your blockade." Gas rippled across the room. This was no longer about personal insult or political theater. It was about the survival of the armed forces themselves. She opened the file and began to read. On April 12th, the Pacific Fleet operated without a confirmed deputy commander for nearly 3 months due to your hold. During that time, critical readiness exercises were canceled. Our allies noted the gap. Our adversaries took note as well. Her eyes rose from the page, locking on Tuberville. The weight of the words hung like a storm cloud over his head. On May 3rd, NATO exercises, the largest since the Cold War, lacked a logistics chief because of another block promotion. Coordination slowed. Allies were forced to adapt without American leadership. She turned another page, her voice firm and merciless. Emergency response units here at home were left without confirmed commanders during natural disasters. Wildfire evacuations stalled in Colorado. Hurricane relief was delayed in the Gulf. These are not abstract consequences. These are failures of readiness, and they are written here, signed, dated, stamped, with the authority of the Department of Defense. Each example landed like artillery pounding against Tuberville's wall of denial. The gallery stirred uneasily, veterans shifting in their seats, their faces carved with fury and disbelief. Reporters scribbled faster, their pens racing to capture the collapse unfolding live. The cameras zoomed in closer, filling screens across America, with the seal, the signatures, the undeniable record of harm. Crockett didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. Her calm was deadlier than any scream. She looked up again, her words precise and cold. This isn't politics. This isn't a game. This file proves that your blockade has weakened America's readiness, paralyzed its response, and emboldened its adversaries. These aren't talking points, they are official records bearing names, dates, and consequences. Men and women trained to defend this nation have been trapped in limbo because of you. The silence in the room was crushing, every syllable hitting like a gavel. Tuberville shifted in his chair, his face pale, his jaw clenched. His lips opened, but his words stumbled out weak and broken. Fake news. Political games, he muttered, repeating the line again, softer each time, as though saying it enough times might make the evidence vanish. But nothing vanished. The cameras caught his every tremor, every bead of sweat sliding down his temple. His once booming voice sounded small, hollow, powerless against the paper in Crockett's hand. Jasmine snapped the file shut, the sound echoing like a verdict. She leaned forward one last time, her words slicing through the silence. This is no longer politics. This is national security. This is the survival of our military and the future of those sworn to protect this country. And no senator, no matter how loud, has the right to gamble with America's defense. The chamber was frozen, locked in a silence so heavy it seemed to crush the air itself. And across the nation, millions of Americans stared at their screens, watching a senator reduced to whispers and a congresswoman holding the fate of truth in her hands. The chamber was still frozen in silence when the outside world caught fire. Cameras didn't wait for the gavel to fall. Clips of the confrontation were already slicing their way across phones, televisions, and computer screens. By the time Jasmine Crockett closed the file, millions of Americans had already replayed the moment Tuberville stammered under the weight of official documents. Social media feeds erupted, news sites pushed breaking alerts, and the sound of his mocking laugh, side by side with her devastating evidence, became the real everyone was sharing. It was the rare moment where history was unfolding live, and the world refused to look away. Within hours, the first voices rose, not from politicians, but from veterans. A retired Marine posted a video shaking his head, his voice trembling with conviction. Crockett spoke for every military family tonight. She said what we've lived. She stood where we couldn't. His words spread like wildfire, echoed by soldiers' groups, veterans associations, and families who had endured the grind of deployments and uncertainty. What had started as a congressional hearing now felt like a reckoning. Ordinary Americans who had worn the uniform were standing up, pointing to Crockett as their voice inside the marble halls. At first, the conservative networks circled the wagons around Tuberville, spinning the clash as partisan theater. Anchors insisted the hearing was just politics as usual, while pundits tried to shift the conversation to Pentagon policies. But the clips kept playing, and the evidence was undeniable. Official seals, signatures, and dates couldn't be brushed aside. Slowly, awkwardly, the tone changed. By nightfall, one commentator admitted on live television, "It's hard to defend him when the documents are that clear." The pivot was subtle but unmistakable. The narrative was slipping away from Tuberville's control. Late-night talk shows pounced their monologues, cutting sharper than any gavel strike. One host leaned over his desk playing Tuberville's laugh on loop before freezing the screen on his panicked face. He didn't lose because of Crockett's words, the host quipped. He lost because he laughed at the wrong person at the wrong time. The audience roared, but beneath the comedy was a deeper truth that commentators repeated across the board. Tuberville had humiliated himself. He hadn't just been defeated, he had handed his opponent the weapon. Meanwhile, whispers began circulating inside the military itself. Anonymous emails reached reporters' inboxes, messages from officers who had watched the hearing with quiet fury and unexpected relief. One letter read simply, "She told the truth. We can't say it in uniform, but we're grateful she did." Another unsigned carried the weight of exhaustion. "We've been stuck in limbo. Tonight someone finally said it out loud." The testimonies didn't come with names, but they didn't need to. They carried the authority of those living the consequences in silence. The clip had grown bigger than a scandal. It had become a mirror, reflecting a nation's conscience. In every replay, Tuberville's laugh clashed against Crockett's calm. In every analysis, veterans' voices rose above politicians' spin. And as the day turned into night, the momentum was undeniable. America was not just watching a senator unravel. It was watching a congresswoman channel the weight of sacrifice into a moment that could not be ignored. As the viral clip ricocheted across the country and veterans' messages piled up, the ripple from the hearing became a tidal wave, and Capitol Hill moved accordingly. Committee staffers sprinted draft language across marble corridors, while leadership huddled in tight circles, voices low and clipped. A resolution landed on the docket to compel Senator Tuberville to lift his blanket hold on military promotions, citing national security risk and institutional paralysis. The title was read like a warning flare, and the clerk's monotone somehow carried urgency as the chamber filled. Members lined up at microphones one after another, arguing that readiness could not be a bargaining chip, that command chains could not live in limbo. When the gavel came down to open debate, the room thrummed like a generator under load, every sentence sparking another round of electricity. Inside the Republican conference, fracture lines showed in clenched jaws and careful phrases. A loyal bloc rallied behind Tuberville, branding the hold as principled discipline and a stand against overreach. But a larger band studied district maps and base communities, calculating the cost of crossing military households in a year already rattled by uncertainty. Whips took quiet soundings, and the numbers slid as calls from veterans groups stacked up like sandbags before a rising river. "Our people are angry," one member admitted behind a closed-door, eyes fixed on polling in counties built around forts and shipyards. Another warned that the party could win a skirmish on talking points and lose the war with families who wear the uniform in base housing in church halls on payday Fridays. Morning papers captured the turn with front pages that hit like alarms at dawn and again at dusk. The Vietnam letter that changed the game blared one banner, while another declared, "From laugh to silence, a senator's worst night." Editorial boards called the letter moral authority set to paper, and the declassified file proof burned into public record. Op-eds contrasted stadium cheers with flag-draped coffins, asking what leadership means when families live by orders miles and months. Photo layouts paired Jasmine Crockett at the microphone with a still of Tuberville frozen mid-grimace, the story told, without a single caption. By noon, cable producers were booking generals, chaplains, and spouses, and every Chiron led with the same premise: the battlefield had shifted. Pollsters poured into the breach, launching overnight surveys that read like seismographs after an earthquake. Tuberville's approval plunged across key demographics, with the sharpest drop among veterans, active duty households, and older men who once formed his bedrock. Jasmine Crockett surged not as a partisan mascot, but as the voice who carried the ledger of sacrifice into daylight. Focus groups in base towns and shipyard counties repeated the same refrain. She told the truth, and he laughed. Trend lines bent hard in real time, and strategists redrew their maps with pens that seemed to skid across the paper. When the latest wave posted to the wire, the headline was simple, and devastating: momentum had changed hands. The polls were still flashing across television screens when something even bigger broke loose. 1 week after the hearing, the frustration that had been building in silence turned into action on the streets. By dawn, buses rolled into Washington from bases and towns across the country. Families poured out, mothers holding signs, fathers in faded service caps, children waving small American flags. Within hours, tens of thousands of military families filled the avenues leading to the Capitol. Their chant was relentless, their banners sharp. "We are not political hostages." The sound wasn't a protest. It was a roar of pent-up voices demanding to be heard. News helicopters hovered overhead, capturing a sea of uniformed strollers and calloused hands lifted high in unison. Jasmine Crockett stepped onto the platform facing the crowd, her figure framed against the dome of Congress. The air vibrated with applause and chants, but when she raised her hand, silence swept over the mass like a tide pulling back from the shore. Her voice carried amplified but steady, as though she were speaking directly to each family there. She reached into her folder and pulled out the same letter that had changed everything. Holding it above her head, she read aloud, her voice rising with each word. "We serve the nation. We do not serve politicians." The line cracked through the air like a thunderclap, and the crowd erupted. Tears streaked down faces weathered by deployments and worry. Veterans saluted. Spouses clutched their children tighter. In that moment, the letter was no longer ink on paper. It was the creed of a movement. Inside the Capitol, the sound of the march echoed through the marble corridors, reaching senators' offices whether they wanted to hear it or not. Tuberville, under siege, scrambled to mount a defense. He scheduled a press conference, stepping out in front of reporters, with his jaw set, his notes clutched like a shield. But the moment he began, the noise of the crowd surged against him, like a wave crashing into a breakwater. Chants pierced the microphones, drowning his words. "We are not political hostages," they shouted, and each repetition battered his image further. Tuberville tried to push through. "This is about principle, not politics," he declared, but boos rained down from the streets. Reporters glanced nervously at one another, struggling to hear him over the fury outside. What was supposed to be a counteroffensive turned into a rout. Within minutes, he cut the event short, retreating behind the doors of the Capitol as cameras captured his stumble. The pressure could no longer be contained. Senators filed into the chamber, the galleries buzzing with anticipation. For days, negotiations had raged behind closed doors, but now the decision would be made in the open. The clerk's voice called the roll, each name answered with a single word that carried the weight of the nation: yea, nay. The votes stacked up, and it became clear, long before the tally ended, the hold would fall. The moment the gavel struck, confirming the resolution to end Tuberville's blockade, the chamber erupted. Applause, cheers, even tears broke through the formality of marble and oak. The deadlock that had paralyzed the military for months was shattered in a single historic vote. Outside, the crowd surged with joy, their chants transforming from protest into celebration. Families lifted their children onto their shoulders. Veterans raised their fists, and strangers embraced as though they had won a battle together. The sound was deafening, rolling across Washington like a victory parade. Crockett returned to the podium not to claim credit, but to honor the voices that had made it possible. "This victory belongs to you," she said, pointing to the crowd, to every family that refused to be silent, to every soldier who stood ready while politics tried to hold them back. Her words drew a roar louder than before, a sound that seemed to shake the very steps of the Capitol. Television anchors spoke with breathless urgency, their voices carrying the gravity of what the country had just witnessed. Graphics splashed across screens: historic vote ends military blockade. But the most striking headline came from a commentator on live broadcast, summing it up in a phrase that spread faster than any statistic. This was the battle between arrogant laughter and the truth of the battlefield, and the truth won. The line echoed across networks, quoted in papers, replayed in clips, becoming the epitaph of Tuberville's defiance. It was not just a story of politics undone, but of a nation reminded that sacrifice demands respect, and silence, in the face of arrogance, can be more powerful than any shout. And so, with the chants still rattling the windows of Congress, America marked a turning point. The laughter that once mocked sacrifice was drowned forever by the roar of families who refused to be pawns, and by the voice of a daughter who carried her father's truth into the heart of power. The vote was done, the chants still echoing outside, but the meaning of what had happened stretched far beyond a single resolution. This was never just about a congresswoman cornering a senator. It was about truth standing toe-to-toe with arrogance and winning. Tuberville's laugh had been meant to humiliate. Instead, it became the sound of his undoing, drowned out by a letter that carried more weight than any speech or slogan. The message was impossible to miss. No politician has the right to use soldiers as bargaining chips to gamble with lives in order to score points. Real service, real sacrifice. Those cannot be mocked, cannot be turned into tools of convenience. The file, the letter, the roar of families, they all drove the same point home. Power doesn't belong to the loudest man in the room. It belongs to the truth written in blood and scars, in the silence of waiting families. And it carried something even deeper, the strength of an ordinary family shaking the halls of Congress. For older Americans watching men who had served fathers, who remembered nights of worry and sacrifice, the image of Master Sergeant James Crockett was a mirror. They saw themselves in him, and they saw a daughter refusing to let that sacrifice be disrespected. Pride welled up in living rooms and veterans' halls, a pride born not from politics, but from honor passed down through generations. As flashbulbs fired and cheers thundered, Jasmine stood outside holding her father's letter high. The paper trembled under the lights, not from weakness, but from the force of history burning into memory. The crowd roared, the cameras clicked, and in that single image, a daughter with her father's truth in hand, America saw a new symbol carved forever into its political story. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.